get ready to dim the lights and lock your doors. Friday Night Frights is here to haunt your weekend. Every Friday night, we bring you spine-chilling tales of the macabre, the mysterious, and the downright terrifying. From cursed artifacts to shadowy creatures lurking in the dark, these stories will keep you on the edge of your seat long after the episode ends. Are you brave enough to listen? Tune in and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more eerie episodes. To celebrate our 2-year anniversary, we're bringing back some of our old favorites, some of the stories that I wrote in the very beginning. A lot of these stories get lost in the archives, and we have a lot of new subscribers that have never heard some of those old stories. So for those of you that have been with us a while, well, you might have heard these stories before. But for those who are new, I hope you enjoy our stories. The story you are about to hear is true. The names have been changed as well as some of the minor details, but the facts have remained as I remember them in the hidden corners of my mind. The Mother by Ginger Winters. It had been snowing on and off for hours. The roads were icy, and although the snow actually gave the tires a little more traction, it was a white-knuckle drive back to Tahoe. Not much longer and they'd close the roads. Jim and his wife were driving home from a trip to the city. Traffic was moving slowly, and he hoped he'd make it down Echo Summit before the snow turned any heavier and forced the road closure. He'd hate to have to turn back at this point. He was tired and anxious to get home, have dinner, pour himself a glass of bourbon, and put his feet up. He knew his wife was tired too. She dozed in the seat next to him, occasionally letting out a soft snore. It had been a long day. He glanced over at his wife. She had been his companion for over 30 years, and he felt like he knew her as well as he knew himself. He smiled as he watched her eyelids flicker while she slept. I wonder what she's dreaming, he thought to himself. They'd already made it past the halfway point and were nearing Strawberry, which always felt like the marker for the last stretch home. His wife jolted out of her sleepy reverie and yelled, "Stop! Go back!" "What?" he said. "I saw a woman back there, standing on the side of the road." "No, you didn't. You were asleep. You must have dreamt it." "No, Jim, I swear. I saw her. She was standing on the side of the road. Turn back." "You're just being silly. There was no one there. I would have seen her. And besides, it's snowing like crazy. No one would be standing on the side of the road. Did you see a car?" "No, I didn't see a car, but I saw a woman. I'm not kidding. She was standing there plain as day, on the side of the road. You've got to turn back." "I am not turning back. We're almost home. You were asleep. You must have dreamt it." "Please, please turn back." "No, damn it. Not in this snow. If we don't make it over the summit now, it's just going to get worse. I want to get off these roads, get home, and relax. Now just go back to sleep and you'll forget all about it." "Let's call the sheriff, Jim." "Don't be ridiculous. You know there's no reception up here. You won't get a cell signal till we reach town. And besides, you don't want them traveling up here in the snow just because you dreamt you saw a woman on the side of the road." Susan folded her arms across her chest, a sure sign that she was angry. She pursed her lips and scanned her memory for details. What was the woman wearing? What color was her hair? The entire rest of the trip, Susan sat silent, trying to convince herself that her husband was right. Maybe she did actually dream it. No, it was too real. But why then did her husband not see the woman? It was another half an hour before they reached home. The snow had covered their steps and driveway, so Jim parked in the street and went to grab the snow shovel, while Susan waited in the car. He cleared a path for her, then proceeded to shovel the driveway. She knew it would take him a while, so she went inside and promptly called the sheriff's department. She didn't have much information to give them. She knew the general location and vaguely remembered what she thought the woman looked like, and asked for them to please send someone up there. Maybe she'd had car trouble. The sheriff said no one else had reported anything, and most likely, if there had been someone out there, they would have been given a ride into town. But nevertheless, he'd alert his deputies, and they'd send out a truck just to be safe. The deputy assigned to the call was a bit perturbed at having to drive up the summit in the snow. It was still early in the season, and the snow wasn't too deep yet, but that can change rapidly in the mountains. More than likely, the state would call for a road closure before morning. He drove slowly as he approached the mile marker that Susan had noted and started scanning the tree line for any signs of a car that had gone off the road. He didn't notice any tracks and figured this was just another case of a mistaken waste of time. He was already a couple of miles past where Susan had thought she'd seen someone, so he turned around and drove back in the direction that they had come. He paused as he drove past a few stands of trees that looked like maybe they had had some broken branches. He pulled to the side of the road and threw his spotlight down the ravine. Fresh snow had covered any sign of tracks, but there was no denying that the branches had been disturbed. He decided to get out and take a closer look. The embankment was rather steep, and he didn't want to slide down the ravine in the ice and snow, but just as he decided to turn back, he thought he saw a reflection caught in the beam of his flashlight. He moved his light back and forth a couple of times and still caught the glint of the reflection again. "There's something down there," he thought to himself. He radioed it in, calling for backup, and headed down the ravine for a closer look. As he got closer, he could see a car. It appeared to have cascaded down the ravine and hit a tree head-on just before it would have plunged into the river. He slid in the snow, picking up speed to get down to the vehicle. He looked inside, and slumped over the steering wheel was a woman, pinned between the steering wheel and the crushed front end of the vehicle. She was not alive. It appeared that the impact had more than likely been fatal. But in the back seat was a child's car seat, and a little girl was strapped in, very much alive. The doors were locked. He broke the window on the opposite side of the car seat and opened the door and got the child out to safety. There's no explanation why Susan saw a woman standing on that stretch of highway. The child would have frozen to death if she hadn't called it in. Was it an apparition of the little girl's mother who appeared to Susan on the side of the road? Is that the reason her husband didn't see her? All we really know is that a little girl is alive today thanks to the woman who appeared on the side of the road and the reaction of the woman who saw her. The Ghost Cats by Ginger Winters. One of our listeners, Nancy, sent in an email about a ghost cat, which brought back so many memories. I will tell you her story, and then I will tell you mine. Nancy recalls living at a house where she would feel something jump on her bed at night and lay there beside her leg. She didn't own any pets at the time. She could feel the weight of it move across both her legs and settle beside her left calf. She felt frozen and didn't move the first time it happened, but as it occurred almost nightly, she finally got used to it and didn't feel as scared. She decided one night to get up and turn the light on to see if she could see anything, but there was nothing there. Ghost cats love to curl up in bed next to the warmth of your body. I grew up with ghost cats. When I was young, we had a next-door neighbor who constantly complained about our howling cat. She claimed it kept her up at night. She could see it sitting in the window of our house, and it had the most obnoxious cry. She said it was a Siamese, black and tan. We had no such cat, and there were no feral cats hanging around our house. So one day, she rang our doorbell, and my mother let her come in and asked her to have a seat in the living room, which had the window where this woman claimed she always saw our cat sitting. My mom left the room to get them both a glass of iced tea. She heard a scream and rushed back to the living room. The neighbor was visibly upset, holding her arm, and proceeded to tell us that our obnoxious cat had just attacked her. My mom had tried to tell her for months that we did not own a cat. There was no cat in our house, and there was no cat who could have attacked her. They got into an argument. The neighbor ran home, furious at my mother, and never spoke to us again. None of my brothers or sisters ever saw that ghost cat. About a year later, we moved into a nice 2-story home several blocks away. My stepfather was very strict, very sure of himself, and absolutely did not believe in ghosts. He had built an organ from a kit and was very proud of it. It held a place of prominence in our living room. He not only built the organ by hand, by himself, but he tuned it and taught himself to play. He had the most horrible sounding voice I have ever heard, and we all tried to leave the house when he began to sing. I remember his favorite song was Moonlight Serenade, which is a beautiful song when sung by Frank Sinatra, but my stepfather Merle sounded like fingernails on a blackboard. It was awful. So one morning at breakfast, Merle was very angry and wanted to know which one of us had brought that gosh darn cat into the house. My brother and I looked at each other and shrugged our shoulders. We hadn't brought home a cat. Mom certainly hadn't. She knew Merle was allergic to cats. Perhaps a cat had snuck into our house. It was forgotten until evening when Merle sat down to play. My brother and I went up to our rooms, and my mom was in the kitchen. Merle came raging out of the living room, yelling at a cat. Apparently, this cat howled every time Merle would start to sing. We all came into the living room to witness this occurrence, but nothing happened. We thought he was making it up. But over the next several days, we began to see a cat just out of the corner of our eyes. The bottom of the organ had a hole about 6 or 8 inches square. I think it's called a tone hole. We would see this cat coming and going out of that tone hole. If you looked directly at it, it wasn't there, but you could catch it out of the corner of your eye. We all saw it. Over the weeks and months that followed, the ghost cat became a part of our family. Sometimes you'd see it lying on the sofa, but if you looked straight on, there was nothing there. Friends would come over to play, and sometimes they'd see it too. The cat continued to torment my stepfather, and he finally gave up singing. Throughout the years, I've had cats and occasionally ghost cats that seem not to get along. The real cat will hiss and growl as if something is there, but you can't see anything. And like Nancy, I've felt them jump on the bed, lie against my leg, and upon turning on the light, there is nothing there. But my favorite cat story is one that occurred just a couple of years ago. My mother was very old, 93 actually, and close to dying. She had always loved cats. In her final days, she lived in a little apartment with my sister. They are not allowed to have cats in their building, so my mom could not have one. But in her final days, a cat appeared. My sister saw it and tried to make it leave, but even though she'd throw it outside, it would be back in my mom's room again, lying there beside her. Over the several days that my mom was dying, this cat stayed by her side, and as my mom took her final breaths, The cat lay in her arms. After my mom's passing, the cat disappeared and has not been seen again. Do you have a ghost cat story? Send it in to thehiddencorners.story@gmail.com. I'd love to hear it. The Demon Cat by Ginger Winters. Adapted from a novel by William P. Barron. Why am I here in this place of madness, this house of diseased minds? Because of a cat. And it is a cat that will take me away from this place to my death. I know it. And maybe this cat will follow on to haunt me in some other world, as it has in this one. Who knows? It all began when I was a boy, a lonely boy in my grandmother's house. My grandmother had a great Siamese cat named Ming that she loved as only an old woman can love a cat. Perhaps it was because I was jealous of the love and attention my grandmother lavished on Ming, or perhaps it was some inborn cruelty, the same impish impulse to inflict suffering on a helpless, dumb creature which I have observed in other boys. Anyway, with or without reason, I hated this self-complacent, supercilious animal that looked at me with her big blue eyes, with a look that seemed to see through and beyond me, as if I did not exist. I hated her with a hatred that could be satisfied only with her death. And I thought and brooded for hours of ways and means to bring this death about. I must be fair to myself. Ming hated me, too. I could sense it as I sat by my grandmother's chair before the fire and looked across at Ming, who lay in a chair on the opposite side. At such times I would always catch her watching me out of half-closed, almond-shaped eyes, stealthily, furtively, never off her guard, as if she was just waiting for the opportunity to leap at me and scratch my eyes out. If she lay in my grandmother's lap and I leaned over to stroke her beautiful creamy fur, I could feel her actually shrink from my hand and let loose a low growl, suddenly biting my hand, and she would never purr as she always did when my grandmother stroked her. Sometimes I would hold her firmly on my lap and pretend that I loved her for my grandmother's sake. But as I stroked her, my hands would itch and twitch with a desire to clinch my hand in her satiny fur and with the other hand choke her until she died. And she too seemed to sense it, snarling and scratching and biting at me when grandmother wasn't looking. My hatred would become so overpowering that my breath would become hurried, my heart would beat almost to suffocation, and my face would flush. Usually my grandmother, noticing my reddened face, would glance up over her spectacles from the book she was reading and say, "What ails you, Robert? You look flushed and feverish. Perhaps the room is too warm for you. Put Ming down and run out in the air for a while." I would take Ming then, and holding her as tightly as I dared, and with my teeth clenched to restrain myself, I would put her on her cushion and go out. My grandfather had brought Ming, a little tan and black, fluffy, blue-eyed kitten, home with him in his ship from that mysterious land called Siam. And with Ming had come a strange tale of her origin, taken from an old Buddhist monastery garden nestled among age-old pines in the country now known as Thailand. About her neck was a beautifully wrought collar of flexible gold, with a dragon engraved along its length, set with stones of topaz and jade. The collar was made so as to allow for expansion as the need arose, so that Ming was never without her collar from her kittenhood to adult age. In fact, the collar could not be loosened or removed. One day I wandered into the kitchen and saw the cat in Yin's arms. Yin, our Chinese cook, had sailed the 7 seas with my grandfather and now lived with us in the little apartment outside the kitchen. He loved to cook, and the cat was always with him in the kitchen. "What are the words on Ming's collar, Yin?" I asked the old man, who was always so stoically calm. In broken English, he replied, "Words not for you, words good for very great cat, llama cat." "But what do the words say?" I urged. He mooned over the inscription, fingering the collar lovingly, while Ming lay passively in his arms and purred. "I can no say good in English," he explained at last. "It say, death no can do, no can die. See? When llama cat wears this collar, no can die, no can be killed." He concluded vaguely. "It say, love me, I love you. Hate me, I hate you. No can say good in English." And with this, I had to be content for the time. I went to the library and checked out a book on Buddhism and found the words that were engraved on Ming's collar. They referred to a quotation from the 7th book of Buddha, which freely translated reads as follows: "That which is alive hath known death, and that which lives can never die. Death is not, there is only a changing from shape to shape, from life to life. Do me no harm. Protect me, and I will protect thee. Feed me, and I will feed thee. Love me, and I will love thee. Hate me, and I will hate thee. Slay me, and I will slay thee." I took those words to heart and stayed my hand, knowing that I could not kill my grandmother's cat without coming to danger myself. But those words did not alleviate my fear or hatred of that awful cat. One hot summer day, grandmother was sitting on the porch and stroking the cat, who was purring lazily in her lap. Occasionally the cat would open a half-closed eye that would bore right into me with a hatred that made my skin crawl. Grandmother never seemed to notice. "How did grandfather get her?" I asked. "He told me that he found her in the garden of an ancient Buddhist monastery. He and his shipmates were attracted to the beautiful Siamese cats in the garden. It seemed the Buddhist monks reared these cats as a sort of religious duty. He knew I would love one, so he snuck a kitten into the pocket of his great coat and brought it home to me. There were so many of them, he assumed they would never know one was missing. But after some time, your grandfather started believing that a Buddhist curse of some sort went with Ming. He never did like this cat, and he often said he wished that he had not whisked her into the pocket of his big jacket when the priests were not looking. He seemed to think that the cat sat on his chest at night and sucked his breath away. I told him he was being silly, that she just liked to be near me. But when he died one night in his sleep, Ming was sitting there on his chest. I think she was just guarding him into the afterlife. That's what they say, you know. Myself, I don't believe in these superstitious curses and omens," grandmother said. "I have always found her a great comfort and a thing to love." When she would hold out her hands to Ming, the great cat would leap in her lap and rub her head lovingly against my grandmother's neck. But after grandmother's story, I feared Ming more than ever. This fear was an intangible, elusive thing. I could not understand it or analyze it, but it was very real. If I wandered about the dim old passageways of my grandmother's huge house or explored the dusty cobwebbed rooms, there seemed always to follow after me the soft padding sound of Ming's paws. Following, always following me, but never coming near, always just beyond where I could see. If I called her to me, I would hear a low growl. It was maddening, always to hear that soft, stealthy, almost inaudible sound of padded feet, and then the growling that always seemed to follow. In my bedroom, sitting alone before the fire with the door locked and bolted, every corner of the room previously explored, the bed looked under, I would always feel that she was sitting there behind me, watching me out of vigilant blue eyes, eyes that were full of suspicion and hate. Waiting, watching, for what? I did not know. I only feared. Out of this fear grew many unreal terrors. I came to believe that Ming was waiting for a favorable chance to spring on me from behind, or when I was asleep, and to dig her great curved claws into my throat, tearing and rending it in her hate. I knew that she would land on my chest, and she would suck all the breath away from me, and I would die in my sleep. Of this I was certain. I became so possessed by this fear that I fashioned a leather collar for myself that fitted well up under my ears and around my neck. I wore this whenever I was alone in my room, and when I slept, gaining some sense of security, but no one can know the fear I suffered. My eyes would no sooner close in drowsy weariness when the stealthy padding of Ming's footsteps would begin. I could hear them coming softly up the stairs, stealing along the dark passageway to my room at the end of the hall. They stopped there because the door was locked and bolted, with my heavy dresser jammed against it as an extra precaution. I would listen intently, and I fancied I could hear a faint scratching sound at the door. Then there would rush over me all the terrors of the dark. The cold sweat of fear would exude from every pore as my imagination visualized Ming leaping through the window and, with a snarl, pouncing upon my throat with tooth and claw. I would shudder and tremble, feeling about my neck to make sure my leather collar was securely fastened. At last, unable to stand the uncertainty any longer, I would leap out of bed, turn on the light, rush to the door, frantically drag the heavy dresser to one side, and throw open the door. Nothing. The cat wasn't there. Then I would creep along the passageway to the head of the stairs and peer down into the dimly lighted hall. Nothing. The cat wasn't there. Looking fearfully over my shoulder as I went, I would go back to my room, shut the door, lock and bolt it again, push the dresser back against it, assure myself that the window was closed, and jump into bed, burying my head beneath the covers. Then I could sleep. Sleep only to dream that Ming had crept softly into the room and was sucking the breath out of my body. Night after night I lived this life of cowering terror, of listening for the haunting sound of stealthy, softly padding footsteps always following me. But one day, everything changed. How sweet it was at the time, how frightful it seems now. It was bedtime, and I raced up the stairs and down the long passageway to my bedroom, shutting and locking the door as quickly as I could. Hastily undressing, throwing my clothes here and there, I plunged into the very center of the bed and buried my head beneath the covers. There I waited in shivering terror for the sound of padding footsteps. But they never came. I listened for what seemed like hours, but nothing. I finally slept. The next morning I woke refreshed for the first time in months. As I walked into the kitchen, I could tell something was wrong, though. Grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table, crying. "Grandmother, what's wrong?" I asked. Through her tears, Grandmother told me that Ming had been out hunting, as cats do, and had been hit by a car. At this, she started crying even harder, which allowed me to suppress my smile and sense of relief without her taking notice. I felt sorry for Grandmother, but I could not have been happier if I had been given $1 million. I fairly danced around the house that day. No fear, No demon cat waiting to jump out at me from behind the sofa. No maniacal howling or growling or anything. It was glorious. Yin and I helped the gardener dig a hole in which to bury the poor cat, and we carefully assisted grandmother out to the yard to say her final goodbyes. We asked if we could remove the collar before setting the cat into her grave. Grandmother said, "Certainly not. It stays with Ming." And so the cat was buried amongst grandmother's flower garden, the collar still attached. That night, as dark approached, I calmly walked to my room and shut the door, not even bothering with the locks. I breathed a big sigh of relief and happiness as I sunk into my pillow, looking forward to the silence of the night. I closed my eyes and drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. Suddenly, my eyes bolted open. What was it I heard? The moonlight was shining in from the open window, and I thought I saw two fiery eyes glaring at me. Was I in the clutches of a nightmare? Or had I, in my haste to get to bed, neglected to shut the window? Suddenly, the big cat leaped from the window right onto the bed. I sat frozen, shivering with terror, as the big cat stared into my eyes. What was that around her neck? A collar? Ming's collar? How could it be? Ming was dead. We had buried it in the garden. How could she be here on my bed? The great cat slouched into a poise of attack, ready to leap, a low growl coming from her throat. I screamed. A live and famished man-eating tiger in the room could not have inspired me with greater terror. I swung my arm to knock the great cat away and felt the claws tear into my skin. I fled down the stairs, stumbling over furniture in the lower hall until I reached the cook's room. Here I knocked and begged, with chattering teeth, to be allowed to remain on the couch in his room until morning, telling him I had been frightened by a dreadful dream. Early the next morning, I stole into the kitchen, watching carefully for any glimpse of Ming. Yin was waiting there, a cup of coffee in his hands, an anxious look on his face. "Master Robert, no wonder that you could not sleep last night. Your poor grandmother passed away in the night. It must have been some time after midnight, for I had checked in on her at around 11. I cried out, not for surprise or grief at my grandmother's death. That was a thing to be expected, for she was very old and hadn't been well these last few weeks. Nor was it for the joy in knowing I was now the heir of a wealthy fortune that my grandparents had accumulated over the course of their lifetime. My inheritance would be a thing of little worth if I must spend anxious days and fear-haunted nights in the house with a ghost cat. No, I thought only of Ming and the dread of her return and the terror I had experienced in the night. How strange that my grandmother's passing and the return of the demon cat had coincided. My grandmother had been my guardian since I was a very young boy. My parents had been killed in a terrible accident. We were living in India. My father was a traveling doctor, a highly sought-after surgeon, and my mother was a nurse. They both had a love of exotic cultures and would spend a year in one country or another, establishing medical clinics in remote areas. One day, a giant tiger had wandered into the village and into the clinic where my mother and father were working. They never saw it coming, and I never saw them again. Terror filled my mind as I slowly walked back to my room. Would the cat be there, waiting still, ready to leap and devour me? Was it an apparition of the night? How could I stay within these walls another day? Gratefully, Yin could sense my fear, and thinking that it was because I didn't want to stay in the house where my grandmother had passed, he arranged for me to stay with friends of his in the city who had a son my age. I was free at last, free from the fear of claws and teeth in my quivering throat, free from the sound of softly padding feet. I started at a new school and quickly became best friends with my new brother. We shared a room in their little apartment, which was wonderful. I didn't have to be alone any longer. Soon the memory of Ming was fading into the distance, and I was a new boy. In the years that followed, Yin stayed on at grandmother's house as caretaker. I did not return again to the house of my inheritance until I was a young man, freshly graduated from college, and with my new bride, a soft, shy, pretty little thing with big blue eyes. I was very happy, wealthy, and married to a loving and beautiful girl whom I adored. I looked forward to a long life of peace and happiness. We decided to move to the country on the grand estate that had been my inheritance. We arranged for housekeepers, gardeners, and a cook to prepare for our arrival. But from the very day of my return to the accursed estate of my grandmother, there was a change. What was it? I do not know, but I could feel it. I could sense it the very first day. A subtle feeling, a sense of gloom, intangible, elusive and baffling, began slowly to settle over me, stifling and suffocating the happiness that had been mine before returning to the big home of my inheritance. I had come from the village with some trifle of household necessity. Returning, I sought out my wife and found her in my grandmother's old room, standing before the life-sized portrait of Ming, done in oil for my grandmother by a great artist who had also loved cats. Until that day, Ming had remained only a dim memory of my fear-driven youth. Purposely, I had put all thought of her out of my mind. But now it all returned, a horde of hateful memories, as I stood there in the open door and saw my wife standing and gazing up at the likeness of the great cat. And as she turned, startled at my entrance, what did I see? I saw, or thought I saw, a likeness, a great likeness between the two. Her great blue eyes, her silky hair, the feline expression. Why had I not noticed it before? "You frightened me, Robert," she laughed. "The look on your face, what is it?" "Nothing," I answered, "nothing at all." I reached out to give her a hug. Did she shrink from my caress? Did her body tremble in my arms? Or was it my imagination, the stirring of old memories of Ming, who shrank from my lightest touch? As the day wore on, I grew restless and uneasy, ill at ease and dissatisfied. After dinner, I went for a long walk along the country road. When I returned, my wife was asleep. I lay down softly beside her, and, tired out by my long walk, was soon asleep myself. Asleep, I dreamed of Ming. So vivid and so real was the dream that I awoke with a cry of the cat in my ears, and as I awoke, I seemed to hear it again, very plainly, subdued, a half-cat, half-human howl, and my wife was gone. I sprang up hastily. The moonlight was streaming through the window. It was almost as light as day. She was nowhere in the room. I went swiftly down the hall and descended the stairs, making no noise with my bare feet. The door of my grandmother's room was open. I looked in. 2 luminous blue eyes glowed out at me from the semi-darkness of the far corner. For an instant my heart stood still and then raced palpitatingly on. I took a deep breath and went toward the unknown thing with glowing eyes that crouched in the corner. As I reached the pool of moonlight in the center of the room, I heard a gasp of fear, a sudden movement, and my wife fled past me, out of the room and up the stairs. I heard the bedroom door slam behind her, heard the key turn in the lock. As she rushed past me and up the stairs, the patter of her feet fell on my ears like the soft padding of Ming's footsteps that had filled my youthful years with fear. My blood chilled at this old, until now, forgotten sound. The slamming of the bedroom door, the turning of the key in the lock, roused in me an overwhelming fury. Was I to be locked out of my own bedroom? Our bedroom? I rushed up the stairs. Angrily, I knocked on the door. I pounded with my fists on the panels. I shouted, "Open! Open this door!" In the midst of my furious onslaught, the door suddenly opened, and a sleepy little figure stood aside to allow me to enter. "What's going on?" she exclaimed. "What's the matter? Where have you been? I was sound asleep and you frightened me, shouting and pounding at the door. Why didn't you just walk in?" Was I deceived? Partly. But her eyes, in her eyes was that sly, inscrutable, cat-like look that I had never seen there until this day. "What were you doing downstairs, alone, in my grandmother's room?" I stammered. "And why did you lock the door?" She arched her brows incredulously. "What are you talking about? Me? Robert, what is wrong with you? I just this moment awoke from a sound sleep because you were banging on the door. It wasn't even locked. How could I be downstairs?" "But the bedroom door was locked," I yelled. "You must have locked it yourself then," she exclaimed. "It definitely wasn't me." Somehow I knew, beyond a reasonable doubt, that she was lying. I knew I had been fully awake and in my right senses when I had gone downstairs and found her there. Evidently she desired to deceive me, and until I could fathom her motive, I would just have to pretend to believe her. So, muttering something to the effect that she must be right, we got back into bed. But I couldn't sleep. Forcing its way into my harried mind was my old youthful fear of the dark, and I thought back on all those terror-haunted days when I dwelt in fear of Ming. Lying there in the dark, I resolved that we should move from this ghastly place, no matter how grand an estate it was. I finally fell asleep. I slept far into the next day, awakening at noon to find my wife had gone out with some of our neighbors for a game of tennis. And since it was daylight, the terrors of the night seemed unreal, silly, half-forgotten nightmares. So I dismissed the subject from my mind for the time being and set out for a long walk across the fields. It was near dinner time when I returned. As I opened the door of the dining room, my wife turned from where she stood by the fireplace to greet me, and I was again struck by her resemblance to Ming. She seemed upset. "Robert," she said, "don't you remember what day this is?" I shook my head no. "Really?" she asked with a hurt look on her face. "It's my birthday. I can't believe you forgot my birthday. It's my 21st birthday. Really, Robert, you should have remembered." I noticed that she was dressed up, that her hair was curled, and she was wearing jewelry. Jewelry? What was that around her neck? My eyes widened in terror as I took in the sight of her necklace. It was a collar of flexible gold with a dragon engraved along its length, together with many Chinese characters and set with stones of topaz and jade. It was identical to the collar Ming had worn all those years ago. "No!" I screamed. "I forbid you to wear that accursed thing." I ran to her, tried to pry it from her neck, and she gazed at me with terror in her eyes. And then she snarled, no, growled at me. I seized her by her beautiful throat. I meant to choke her until those cruel blue eyes started from their sockets. But I was cheated. The housekeeper and gardener, upon hearing her screams, overpowered me and pulled me away. My wife ran to the bedroom where she locked herself in. And the next day, I was arrested and brought here to the sanatorium. I told them I was perfectly sane. I say it again now. I've told them that every day all these years since I was brought here. And every day my sweet, cooing-voiced wife comes daily to see me. She kisses me with soft, lying lips that long to suck my breath away, or perhaps even rend the flesh of my throat with her little sharp white teeth. I know she'll be the end of me one of these days. In the morning, the orderlies making their rounds opened the door of the old man in room 112. On the bed lay the man, glassy-eyed, with fallen jaw and livid face, dead. On his breast crouched a great Siamese blue-eyed cat who faced them with an arched back and menacing snarl. Involuntarily they drew back. The cat sprang past them and down the passageway to the stairs, uttering an unearthly howl. "My God!" gasped the nurse with pallid lips. "Did you see that? Around the cat's neck, the collar. It was gold with topaz and jade jewels." Thank you for listening to this week's story, and I hope you'll join us next week as we bring you more great classic tales on Friday Night Frights. And until then, have a great week, everyone.